Hello, everybody. Welcome to the War Room Podcast, the war and conflict theme podcast, where every episode we discuss a different topic from war and conflict. I am one of your hosts, Kyle. Right now, if you're watching the video version, it's just me on screen. If you're listening, you probably don't know the difference, but I actually had to re-record this intro part because it got messed up during our actual live recording. But if you are listening, for this episode, we're actually going to cover badass women in history. Which I think is going to be a really interesting topic as we go through it. We're going to get into both of us actually talking about it in a moment once I end this quick introduction that I've re-recorded. But before I do that, I want to bring up some things that were in the intro that got messed up during that recording. So with that, with today's topic, we are going to be covering a bunch of different historical figures that are kind of forgotten about in history because they're women, and we don't treat women particularly fair when it comes to their representation in history, which is not just a statement I have as like a belief that with no foundation. It is something I believe, but I actually did want to intro the fact that there are reasons, or we actually have evidence that this is the case. This isn't just a thing we imagine. I'm actually specifically looking at it's a very interesting website. It's called womenhistory.org. They do a bunch of different studies on the representation of women in history. And if we look at this, they actually break down, essentially they look at the standards that are set by schools in the U.S. specifically. So these are the things that you are required to teach during a particular time frame for students. This is specifically looking at history and social studies. What they did is they broke down the times that women are represented in those studies as individuals and what were the reasons they were brought up. So I actually have a chart here I'm going to go over real quick, which is if we look at the topics that women are represented in history, we find that 53% of all historical figures that are covered in a domestic role. That means spouses, housekeepers, family, or representatives of the family, mothers, things like that. So that is their domestic role exclusively. 20% of women are covered in voting rights and suffrage, which is obviously intrinsically tied to that. So that makes sense. 9% goes to first and second wave women's rights, also intrinsically tied to women, so that one makes sense. As well as 8% to civil rights, 3% on the home front and any war. So that just means their place at the actual home front, not necessarily on the battlefield. And lastly, 2% in the workforce, which leaves 3% as other. What we're talking about today technically falls in that other category. That 3% represents everything that I didn't list. So that includes advancements in technology, that includes science, that includes medicine, that includes philosophy, that includes art, that includes anything outside of those very specific categories we just talked about. I mean, half of the time it's literally talking about their role in a traditional family sense as we associate it. So that's kind of why we wanted to talk about this, is because it's insane that despite making up such a high percentage of the population, 50% of the population, they don't get anywhere near the same representation within history. And even within the representation they get, it's very clear that it's biased towards a very specific sector of how we see women in history. And from a standpoint of one, just historical accuracy and fully understanding what people have done doesn't really make sense, because obviously women have contributed far more than just domestic roles in history. And two, if you are, a girl growing up and you're learning history and you see this, it kind of makes it seem like the only roles women can fill are domestic roles, because those are the vast overrepresentation of what's shown. So it does kind of feed into this cycle of keeping women believing these traditional ideas that we put on them. without there actually being any historical necessarily basis for some of these beliefs. It is just a matter of representation and what we choose to look at. So with that said, we specifically want to look at some really cool, really interesting warriors from history that have really defined their era, as well as just have fascinating stories to tell. I can't remember, I might say this later, but I do want to be clear that just because we're covering badass women that were fighting as warriors, that doesn't mean that the women that didn't fight, or the women that took care of these jobs, or the women that fought in other ways via organization or protests or any of these other methods, were any less badass. I want to be clear on that. But with that being said, I did want to just real quick get this introduction done, as well as throw in that last statement. With that, we're going to head back to the actual live episode where we get into the meat of it. So appreciate you listening. Thank you. Anywho, I'm sorry about that. There's a interesting place for essentially all, not just women, but most marginalized groups in history, and how we treat them, especially after the fact. But the beauty of progress and the beauty of history is that as we learn more about it, and as we're able to get more of the picture as time goes on, we can correct these things as they come forward, and we can provide more context and more information about these historical figures, which I think is an important thing to do. History is always changing. We think about it as this like a monolithic thing that we dig up and we find, but as we're going to see with a lot of our examples, that's not really the case. Everyone has their biases when they write their own history that we have to take into account. And there is a lot of different stories that are told from a lot of different perspectives that we need to analyze to actually get what we can even consider a full picture. But at the end of the day, there will always be more to find. There will always be more context to give. So that's what we want to do.
There's always going to be stuff that's missing.
Exactly, yeah. There's always stuff that we'll just never know. So we have to do our best with the information we have, to take a look at it. So with that said, I don't want to take too much more time on that process for getting set up. Let's just go ahead and hop into it. So you were going to start, right?
Yes. So the one that I'm going to start with is a fairly modern one, and it's Ludmila Pavlichenko, and she was from she was a Soviet sniper with the Red Army in World War II. She is credited with 309 confirmed kills. Now, the cool thing about these 309 confirmed kills is that they're not only confirmed by the Soviets, but they're also confirmed by the Germans. She was so prevalent on the battlefield that the Germans were literally keeping tabs on her throughout her time as a functioning soldier on the battlefield. She is the most successful female sniper in history. And she was nicknamed Lady Death for her incredible ability with a sniper rifle. Now, one of the things that is unique about her is that she didn't just act as a sniper. She conducted over 36 sniper-to-sniper engagements. So more often than not, snipers tried to avoid snipers. She actively went out and sought snipers out.
Okay, so like counter sniper type involvement in a way.
It basically sniper duels, literally.
That's a much cooler name for it. And there were
points where it was her and maybe one other Russian sniper, and 3 or 4 German snipers actually actively pursuing them. So a lot of times it wasn't just a sniper duel of one sniper versus another sniper. Sometimes it was offset, and there'd be 2 and 3 in these sniper duels. So she was one of the first people in line for recruiting at the siege of Odessa. So she served during the siege of Odessa, the siege of Sevastopol.
Okay.
During the early stages of the that'd be the Eastern Front.
Okay. Yeah.
She fought all the way up to the point where she was injured by a mortar, and then she was medevac to Moscow, where she recovered for approximately a month, and then she wanted to get back out, back to her sniping duties. Stalin, she was so important to Stalin, he said no, would not send her back out. He had her become a trainer, and then he sent her to the US, Canada, and Great Britain as an envoy to try to drum up support to open up another front against Germany. Eleanor Roosevelt, the first lady, was enthralled by Ludmila, and they had several opportunities to dine together and talk together, as well as did the president at the time. So she she started out at a very young age learning to shoot a rifle. And at one point, she even joined a shooting club. When she volunteered to join, they wanted her to be a nurse. And she said, no, I want to join the rifle company. And they were like, no.
Oh, you're talking about so were you talking about when she wanted to join the Soviet army?
Yeah,
Okay.
she wanted to join the rifle company, the infantry, and they wanted her to become a nurse. She kept being insistent. She wanted to be a rifleman, but want to be a rifleman, want to be a rifleman. So what ended up happening was they brought out 2 prisoners, gave her a rifle, and she executed them. Like, no problem. They believed that if they gave her the opportunity to shoot someone, that she would just cave.
Yeah.
And she literally picked up the rifle, sighted it in, smoked them both.
Jeez.
So then they let her join the infantry. However, they wouldn't give her a rifle. They gave her 1 hand grenade. Now, the Soviets were notorious for doing some weird stuff.
Yeah.
They would give one person a rifle and one person ammunition, but you didn't get both.
Yeah.
If you had the ammunition, you had to storm out on the battlefield, find a rifle, pick it up, hope it worked, and use it. If you had a rifle, you had to storm out there, find a corpse that had ammo, pick it up, and fight on. If you fled from the battlefield, the Soviets had a group of people behind you that would shoot you.
Yeah.
So this wasn't uncommon for them to give you, to not give you all the tools for warfare, but expect you to go and wage war.
Yeah.
Basically, with her hand grenade, she charged into battle. She found a wounded soldier on the battlefield. She picked up his rifle, and then she started basically, shooting Germans. They were so impressed, they didn't take the rifle from her.
Fair enough.
Now she was very excited about killing Germans. Like she had no reservations whatsoever. She talked about it openly. She was excited to do it. One of the things that happened at one point, the Germans tried to recruit her to change sides, and they would send messages out. And one of the things that they tried to entice her with was chocolate. They literally said, leave them, join us. We'll give you chocolates and a great life, basically.
Okay.
And she obviously never did that.
Yeah.
She was in a sniper duel, and the other sniper figured out where she was. She was in a tree. That other sniper made a shot. She literally fell out of the tree on purpose, laid there until nightfall, and then crawled away to continue the duel the next day. So she was a formidable human.
Yeah.
Period. Okay. She had stones and then stones and then stones. Now, I would say that 309 was verified by the Soviet army as well as the German army, but her actual kill count is probably closer to 500. A lot of those kills couldn't be confirmed. So she hit a target, but they have no idea whether the target died or not.
Gotcha.
So at one point, the Germans literally, when they were trying to recruit her with the chocolate, they actually mentioned the number 309, to which she was very happy about, because it meant that she basically said it means that they're keeping track of my count as well.
Yeah.
And so that is impressive. When your enemy pays as close attention to you as your allies,
yeah,
you're doing something profound. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Now, one of the problems that happens here is if you look up the 5 best snipers, 10 best snipers, 20 best snipers in history, you're going to get a whole bunch of people, and their numbers are going to move. They'll move up and down. All right. Except for a couple. Okay. The guy that's at 500, he stays number 1.
Yeah.
Period. The guy at 2 and 3, they tend to jostle back and forth on their numbers. However, she's dropped all the way to 7 in some and off the list in others. Generally mentioned around 5, 6 or 7, generally, which is absolutely ridiculous. And I'm going to explain why. So there are only 3 people in history with more kills than her. Only 3. So you would think in a game where your kills are your currency.
Yeah.
If there's only 3 people ahead of you, period, you should be in the top 5 every single time.
Yeah.
No matter, without fail. But that's not actually the case. So there's a sniper, Carlos Hathcock. He's very famous. One of the US's best snipers ever. And he has 93 confirmed kills. There are points where Vasilev Zaitsev is ahead of her. He only has 242 confirmed kills. Chris Kyle.
Yeah.
Lots of people have seen the movie, read the book, gets placed ahead of her quite often, and he only has 160 confirmed kills. So it's not even like these people are close to the skill set that she had.
Yeah.
They weren't even close to that skill set. Now, I would say that they may have been it's difficult to compare, right?
Yeah.
The accuracy of someone to the accuracy. But the bottom line is this is a business of kills.
Yeah.
Period. Whether you killed them the most accurate way or you killed them in the least accurate way, it doesn't matter, because the kill is the kill, and that is the point.
Yeah, there's also an interesting, I mean, just compare, like, especially going from like Chris Kyle to this person, like the difference of fighting for the Soviet army in World War II and fighting for the United States military in modern conflict. I mean, like, just from a resources standpoint, like, there is obviously some things that are comparable, but it's very different. Like, the situation is so immensely different.
Now, I know that we entered World War II because the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
All right. But I would be willing to bet that her coming over to the U.S. and spending time with the president and spending time going to Canada, going to Great Britain, it would not surprise me if part of the reason why we entered the war at the time we did on the German side of that war could partly be because the Roosevelts really were taken by this individual. Now, unfortunately, like a lot of women in history, she comes over. She's already at 309 confirmed. She's in her uniform, and the U.S. reporters were just ignorant. They wrote stories about how she looked fat in her uniform, how her uniform was ugly. They would ask questions in the interview, not about the state of the Soviet people being invaded by the Germans. They asked about lipstick on the battlefield, makeup. Were you allowed to wear dresses on Sundays? These ridiculous questions. And at one point she got fed up and she basically just kind of put it back on them that, and I don't remember the exact quote, but it was something along the lines of, basically, I picked up a rifle and killed Germans because you wouldn't.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what bottom line, that's what she was there for. She was in the US and Canada to drum up support.
Yeah.
And she took a room full of men and basically put it back on them and said, hey, I stood up. Where were you?
Yeah.
Where are you? But I do believe that in this instance, she is clearly in the top 5 just from the confirmed kills, not even all the rest of them.
Yeah.
Keep in mind that there was a big thing in warfare to wound people and not kill them. So these are confirmed kills, not total people shot. Total people shot is probably up in the 1,000. Keep in mind that she was using some pretty antiquated equipment.
Yeah.
She was definitely not using the best top of line equipment.
Yeah.
The Germans at the time probably had the best sniper rifles going, followed by maybe the British. The Russians didn't have the best sniper rifles.
Yeah, I mean the Russians had massive resource issues. All like the whole like one person gets gun and one person gets ammunition thing wasn't
exactly.
That was a necessity. That wasn't by choice if they could help it.
All right, so you go to. I'm going to wrap that up. Do you have any comments on?
No, I think it's an interesting. I think it's an interesting view, especially because like it seems like, and when I was reading through her story, it seemed like someone that just wanted to do their job and just enjoyed their job, but one was so successful that it seems like her only job after that point was kind of a propaganda machine a little bit for the Soviets. When she
I think that from a leadership standpoint, you have to look at it like this. When you get what's an individual's worth on the battlefield? Her worth on the battlefield was not going to go up by her getting more confirmed kills.
Yeah.
She had already established that dominance, and her value really wasn't on the battlefield anymore. Her value was in, one, teaching other snipers to be successful, but in two, drumming up support to open up wanted another front. And she may have actually played a large part in getting that established.
Yeah.
So what's the value for Stalin? The value for Stalin is if you open up another front, it takes you lose less lives on your front.
Yeah.
So, her value at that time was probably more instrumental than what she was doing on the battlefield or what she could do after that on the battlefield. Honestly, from a logistical standpoint.
Yeah.
She definitely wanted back on the battlefild. I mean,
Mhm.
she was very vocal about it.
Yeah.
And you know, she was an outright warrior.
Yeah.
Period. She was hard, as
Mhm.
hard as they come. She faced the starvation, the cold, the crappy conditions, plus the lack of equipment,
Mhm.
and she was able to turn that into a very, very successful uh, uh, career on the battlefield.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Um, yeah. No, I think that's a cool story. Especially, yeah. I mean, honestly, like, Eleanor Roosevelt could have her own episode. She has a lot of credits to her name.
yes,
As well. So, yeah,
yeah, she was a profound figure as well.
mhm. Yeah, it's interesting to see those, because I do remember reading about. It seems like their relationship was actually kind of special, and it seems like there's a little bit of seems like they both had that little bit of they did as much as they could with the political power that they could get, which I think is admirable.
And they were kind of take no crap
Yeah,
personalities.
yeah,
And I think that they probably saw that in each other, even though there was and granted, now keep in mind that there's a communication
hmm
um, where one needs, both of them need interpreters just to
yeah,
communicate. But even with the communication barrier they had, they
hmm
recognize value in each other.
hmm
Um, and so I think that
yeah,
that's pretty cool.
yeah. No, I agree. Cool. Well, with that, I can go ahead and move on to my
Okay.
my look here. So I'm going to be talking about Nakano De Caco, which is a female samurai, technically actually one of the last samurai period. But before I get into the story, there's actually a thing I want to cover. I meant to cover this at the beginning, but the audio stuff kind of threw me off, so I just want to say this real quick, which is we talk about war and conflict, so we're specifically talking about warrior women, right? But I don't want that to take away from the fact that there is historically a lot of women who had places outside of conflict that were just as important. Places
Absolutely.
in protest, places in abolitionist movements, just places in the actual home, places in science. Like, just because the women we're talking about, they were badass and they were warriors on the battlefield, that doesn't make the scientists that discovered these things any less badass. That doesn't make the women that
Right.
helped stop slavery or helped fight against slavery any less badass.
Yeah, exactly.
So I do want to be clear. We're covering this because that is the subject of the show. But that's, this isn't
We also
the
recognize
only...
all the other accomplishments as well.
Exactly. Yeah. I wanted to make sure to say that. With that said, we're going to get into Nakano De Caco. Nakano De Caco was she was actually born to a samurai family. So this is in the late 1800s. She died actually at the age of 22, so that would have been in 1861. And her death actually specifically corresponds to what is called the Boshin Wars. So we actually talked about this a little bit, funny enough, when we talked about Japan in a previous episode, but I'll cover it really quickly, which is that Japan during the late 1800s had a movement of going from a feudal samurai system to actually updating their national army and their national system into what is called the Meiji period or the Meiji Restoration. Essentially, they got rid of the samurai. They said, this system doesn't work. We want to update what we have. The samurai did not like that. The samurai had a huge place of power in this society. The shogun had a massive place of power in that society. They didn't want to relinquish their power. So that leads to the Boshin Wars, which is essentially a civil war between the samurai of Japan, and the what is the Imperial Army, essentially, or what would be the Imperial Army of Japan, which
modernized.
is a modernized military with a modernized structure. They used firearms, things like that, cannons, all that jazz. The samurai were actually pretty hesitant. Some of them did take on firearms and cannons, but by and large, a lot of them were really hesitant to move into that because they preferred the traditional style. Samurai culture is built in a lot of tradition, so that's kind of what's happening around this time period. That all culminates during the time when Nakano actually dies, because she dies fighting in this war. But that's a little bit of history on Japan that leads up to this point. So she specifically was from an area called Eizu. Now this area is very old, very traditional Japanese or samurai roots, very traditional samurai traditions. Funny enough, one of the important traditions in Japan is actually the place of martial arts as a study for everyone. So a lot of people, men and women, both learned martial arts growing up. It was considered like a discipline thing. It was essentially part of your learning regimen. But for women specifically, the Japanese actually did believe that it was important for the women to know how to defend themselves and defend their homes, because they would be the ones at home during times of conflict. Now, for samurai women, or for women in a samurai household, not only did they learn martial arts, but they actually learned how to use weapons. Now, Nakano used the, what was it called? The Nagata, I believe? Nagita? Yeah, I think it's the Nagita. Which is a naginata. There we go. Naginata, which is a pole arm. So it's a long stick with a big scythe at the end, essentially. Which is actually pretty perfect as far as like it's got a really good use as like a defensive weapon as well as an offensive weapon. It's pretty well suited for anyone who's like smaller than their opponent, whether that be a woman or anyone else.
It's also used very well against cavalry.
Yeah, used very well against cavalry as well, which samurai actually used cavalry. So, so she actually was trained heavily in its use. She actually became an instructor in its use as well. So she knew this weapon super well. Now, I do want to point out the reason she knew this weapon so well is because she came from a wealthy family. A lot of women during that time frame would have actually probably gotten martial arts training, but any women that were like of a lower social class probably wouldn't have gotten the same kind of weapons training that she had. So they
wouldn't have had access to those weapons.
Exactly. Yeah. It was a money thing. It was a status thing. So she had a lot going for her in that sense. But what happened is in this Eizu area, in the castle itself, the Imperial Army started to move forward. They knew that they had to take this area, and they knew they had to take it soon, specifically because winter was going to come, and they weren't going to be able to take it in winter. So they had to do this quickly. They had to do it in the season that they launched their attack. So they launched their attack. Women and men all either flee the countryside. Some of them actually commit suicide, as if they don't want to be caught, or they don't want to be taken by the Meiji soldiers. But many of the women actually move back to either help fight where possible. They had actually lost a lot of their male soldiers at this point, so they didn't really have much of a choice. They kind of had to use the women soldiers where they could. And two, actually move back into the castle and do any other tasks that they had. So they could, some of them were nurses, some of them cooked food, some of them actually like stuffed cartridges for like cannons, fletched arrows, exactly. Like did tasks that were still immensely important for the battle itself. And many of them were trained in weaponry, either the tanto or the naginata, and actually took on combat roles. Now, this formation was called the Joshigun, which is a women's army, as it's translated. They actually were originally not allowed to fight. The general was worried that as women, they wouldn't be able to fight effectively. So they essentially banned them from fighting. But then they realized that they don't have the manpower to actually engage with the enemy. And
That's how warfare goes.
yeah, they didn't really have a choice. So they let them fight, and they had some successful engagements with the Meiji troops. I should say this wasn't just Nakano De Caco. She's the most well-known, but there is dozens of women that were in this army that had their own stories. This is the one that was recorded, but there was a lot of people here, not just her. Her most well-known moment, probably the reason that she has ended up in is such an important character in Japanese history, or figure in Japanese history, is actually going to be the Battle of the Yanagi Bridge. So essentially, this is the point where the Meiji soldiers are trying to take this bridge, and they are sent out to defend it. Now, when they enter the bridge, the Meiji soldiers actually stop firing. Remember, they're using firearms primarily because they see that they're women. And they say, hey, they're women, we need to take them alive. Now, after they say that, the Joshigan enter the lines and just start killing them. It's said that Nakano killed 5 to 6 people with her Nagita. And at that point, or Naginata, and then at that point, the Meiji soldiers start opening fire. Nakano is actually killed during that, or she's fatally shot during that altercation. It's actually said that she asked her sister to cut off her head because she didn't want the Meiji soldiers to do so as a war trophy, because she was the leader of the Joshigan group at the time, which is a crazy commitment. Now, Japanese culture has a really interesting interplay with death and suicide and ritual suicide, anyways, which is pretty complicated to get into, but it is a crazy gesture.
But it made sense to her.
Yeah.
And while we kind of probably have some difficulty honestly comprehending it, for their culture at that time, it made perfect sense. There was probably no doubt. And honestly, the sister probably didn't even question it.
Yeah.
It was probably, hey, I want you to do this. And they were like, oh, okay, cool. And then they probably had a ceremony. I mean, it isn't just like some barbaric thing. There's a ceremony that goes with it.
Yeah. Yeah, she was killed, and then they took her head as well as her body, and it was taken to a temple where she was buried. Her Naginata was donated to the temple, which was the thing to do. Now, this is not a story where the main characters we're talking about won. They lost.
No.
The Meiji Restoration happened. The city was taken over. Many of the people, anyone essentially that was in the way was killed, or worse. They retreated to the castle. They held out as long as they could at the castle. I should say, actually, there was another figure, Yamato Yako, who went back to the castle and actually ended up leading all of the riflemen as well as cannon corps in the castle, because no one else knew how firearms and cannons work. It's actually said that she had to explain to the samurai why the cannons went boom, because she was the daughter of a weapons master, or of a gun master,
right? And
they literally, because of their traditional standpoint, didn't know how to operate the things that they were using. They didn't know how to load the cannons. They didn't know how to load the cartridges
that they purchased.
Exactly. So they begrudgingly actually had to give her a position of power, but they kind of even had to be talked into that, despite the fact that they didn't really have much of a choice in the matter. So there's a lot of characters in this story,
and that's historically accurate for a lot of history.
Yeah,
there's a lot of history where they need or require the assistance of a female in order to do the thing that they need to do, and they just so begrudgingly and sometimes to their own peril or their
Mhm.
own doom, refuse to do so. A lot of times it's cost countries,
Yeah.
um, because you didn't want to use this resource because it was just beneath you, or it just because of your own personal beliefs of the inferiority of another human.
Yeah. Yeah. It speaks to a thing I wanted to talk about, which is I think one of the so the story is interesting, and this is an important figure and an interesting figure, but I think one of the cooler parts of the story is it emphasizes something which is called gender essentialism, which is, it's a long word, but what that essentially means is that we like to attribute certain attributes or characteristics to a gender, to a group of people. It also is called biological essentialism, based on their biology, that they do a certain thing because of this. So, for example, women don't like fighting because they naturally don't like fighting. Their biology hardwires them to not like this. This is not a thing I'm saying. This is a thing that they had said. This was a concept that they said. But this actually flies in the face of these concepts. So the reason that the Joshigan took up arms was because they were trained to be able to do so. It wasn't, they had no issue bringing up this point. Actually, there's a quote I have of a description of Nakano De Caco herself that I think perfectly exemplifies this, which it is quoted that with her tied back hair, trousers, and steely eyes, she radiated an intense male spirit and engaged the enemy troops, killing 5 or 6 with her naginata. What we have done is we've taken so her hair was back because that's how samurai wear their hair, because long hair gets in the way in battle. She was wearing trousers because dresses aren't made for battle, so they actually had to wear trousers, which was not traditionally worn by women at this time. We took all these characteristics of her courageousness, of her ability in combat, and we applied them to the male spirit for no reason. We just we've essentially made her a male because it's convenient, and because when we think of males, we think of these things. That's what I mean, is we're taking these concepts, they're not essential. This woman was able to do those things because she was taught those things. She was able to do those things because this society happened to give her a little bit of leeway to be able to step into this role, because they didn't expressly forbid women from fighting. They just heavily implied that it shouldn't be the case. But there's plenty of other examples across the world, even in recent memory, where women weren't allowed to fight in conflicts because they were told that they couldn't fight in conflict. But that's not something that's essential to them as a woman. That's not because they are women and that's the way biologically they work. That's because society has dictated the role in which they live in, and that role changes, and it changes across societies. I think that's a super important lesson we can take from this whole view, is that this is a society that still held women in contempt. This is a society that still had women only exclusively working in the household and only doing those things. It gave them a little bit in these areas, and it shows that it's not something that was because of their gender. It was something that if you give them the tools to complete these things, they'll complete these things. And if you don't give them the tools, they won't do it. And we can't blame it on their ovaries because we didn't train them. We never told them they could even do these things. I think it's an important lesson.
I would say this. A fighting spirit has no gender. And, training aside, there are a lot of women that have taken up arms with zero training.
Yeah.
And it's literally just because they had the spirit to fight.
Yeah.
They had the spirit the will, okay, to do this task. And this is a unique task. It isn't like going to the grocery store. It's not like driving your car. Picking up any object and being violent to another person is a completely different mindset, especially when you have the intent to actually kill that other person, not just hurt them and make them leave, but to actually literally end their future. And so I will say that absolutely, unequivocally, I have seen it in my life. The will to fight has no gender whatsoever. It literally, it's just something you have or you don't have. There are a ton of men that have no will to fight. It's not, it doesn't have anything to do with a gender. And unfortunately, people have created this idea that these things do have a gender, but they don't. It's absolute lunacy. Because not every man, not every male on the planet is a warrior. They're not. Just like not every female on the planet is a warrior, but there are female warriors. I've seen them. I've worked with them. And so I can say without a doubt, there is zero gender to it whatsoever.
For anyone that sticks around to the end of this, after this is over, I have a bonus story about hunters and gatherers that's fun and fascinating. But I don't want to. It's completely off topic, so I don't want to get into that now.
All right.
So you go ahead, and I think you have another figure, right?
Yeah, I've got, now this one's going to be kind of short because I didn't find very much, but I thought it was a very compelling character. Very interesting. Her name is Kut Lulun.
Kut Lulun?
Kut Lulun. It's Khutulun. Kut Lulun.
French, right? Sounds very French.
No, Mongol.
Oh, never mind. Oh, I was confused. Okay, yeah.
Okay. I'm doing this one because it's short.
No, you're good.
I'll do my last one because it's a longer one. She was born about 1260. Now her father is Kadu, and he became the most powerful ruler of Central Asia, reigning the realms from Western Mongolia to Oxus. Now he was it Kublai Khan's brother, I believe.
I think that's right. I don't remember.
So Tulun is Genghis Khan's great granddaughter, I believe. Okay. So she's a character that has been manipulated throughout time. At one point, people were taking her story, changing the name, and then changing the story. And I'll get into that in a second. So Marco Polo described Kutulun as a superb warrior, one who could ride into enemy ranks and snatch a captive as eagerly as a hawk snatches a chicken. She assisted her father in many battles, particularly against the Yun dynasty of her cousin, the Great Khan. She had 14 brothers. In just prior to 1301, when Kadu died, he tried to actually have her ascend to the leadership role. That was declined due to male relatives. So she was actually allowed to guard Kadu's tomb along with her brother Horus. She was challenged by her brother and others to include Shapar and a relative Dua because she resisted the secession, and she died 5 years later. Now, what makes her very interesting is this. The Mongols loved wrestling, and it was a no holds barred MMA type wrestling. Men and women could compete. They placed bets, period. They bet on it. Now, she's an important figure because she is royalty. Okay. a lot of suitors would come to try to marry her. And she said, I will marry no one until they best me in wrestling. Now, the stakes were horses.
Mm-hmm.
So at that time, they write about battles and things, and the figure 10,000 appears all the time. And basically, the generation that was writing at that time, 10,000 was like us saying a million or a buttload.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it
just like means a general high number of things.
More than you can count.
Yeah.
All right. And so there was obviously more than 10,000 at that huge battle.
Mm-hmm.
And so they say that she wrestled and essentially won 10,000 horses.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the more accurate number is actually this. It said that by the time she was done wrestling, she had acquired as many horses as the emperor's herd. Now, in the Mongol culture, horse is power.
Yeah.
Horse is used as currency. Horse is used as battle planning. It's used for farming. It's used for everything.
Yeah. Also, warriors, I should say, warriors had, this wasn't just like one horse. It was so important. Like warriors had multiple horses that they would trade out because your horse would get tired.
Exactly. So one of the things that she was doing was she was literally raising horses as a part of the war effort. She had a gentleman come. She actually liked him. He was a little bit boastful, and she bet him 100 horses. He was so confident, he bet 1,000. He upped it to 1,000. And essentially, she walked away 1,000 horses richer. She eventually did get married, but it was not because she was ever defeated. She was never defeated in wrestling. Period. In all the years, no one bested her in wrestling. She won every time. She was an excellent marksman. There are stories where she would ride out from the back of the battlefield, pick a high-level strategic target, and kill them one shot with an arrow. Her father was so impressed with her skill in battle that he literally had ranked her above all of her brothers. Now, her brothers were all very successful warriors. All of them were trained. But she had some quality that made her stand out. At one point in like 17 something, she basically disappeared from history. Somebody dug her up, changed her name, and basically talked about a princess that would the suitors had to tell her stories. If she wasn't satisfied with the story, then they were killed. And at one point, a play is even made of this character, and it changes a little bit more. But the real person was absolutely an amazing story to begin with.
Yeah.
They didn't need to make any changes. They didn't need to do anything. But like I say, this is a fairly short one.
Yeah.
But the fact that she's even written about at all says something about her prowess on the battlefield. Marco Polo took the time to actually write about this individual.
Yeah.
That says something to her prowess. That means that he saw her on the battlefield and he was impressed. He didn't iterate a lot on the topic, but the fact that she's mentioned at all says that, the watered down version, what was really going on must have been absolutely impressive.
Yeah.
To even warrant a watered down version.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that kind of shows what is pretty important. and this is something we kind of alluded to, and we'll talk a lot more about in the next figure as well. But again, this idea that like history is biased. History is our interpretation of the information that we find. The goal of the historian is to mitigate as much as possible. But there will always be internal biases, both in our own society, as well as a whole, as well as just to you as an individual, that happen. And the goal is to best you can, grow out of that and avoid that. The fact that one person's set of bones can tell two entirely different stories, I think is a really interesting look at that.
Yeah.
Cool. Well,
all right, what we got next?
Yeah, so I am going to be talking about Lady Trieu, Ba Trieu, which is, she's known as, it's weird because she's known as the Vietnamese Joan of Arc. But the problem with that is Joan of Arc was around after she existed. So it seems like Joan of Arc should be the French Lady Trieu, but whatever. We're not going to get into that. So Lady Trieu is a revolutionary figure in Vietnam. Now, again, this is going to be one of those stories where it's not going to have a happy ending, but it has some important things to take away. It is very difficult to find information on Ba Trieu. She is one of those figures that probably existed, but has kind of entered this state of almost mysticism in a way, and
she became a deity.
Yeah, like godliness in a way as well. She's got a temple designated to her. She's also used as an icon for like just like a nationalism type of thing of like the glory of Vietnam and things like that. So we have to take all of the information I'm about to say with a pretty heavy grain of salt, but I'm going to talk about why that is the case in a moment. So we're going to talk about her story as we know it from the readings that we've found. And then we're going to talk about kind of why that is the case. So this is 3rd century Vietnam. So this is 226 to 248 AD is the time period she was alive. So this is pretty early history. At this point, China is split into 3 areas. Vietnam is actually ruled by the Wu dynasty, or the Eastern Wu dynasty. So they controlled Vietnam, and they have on multiple occasions, but prior to this, they actually already had to deal with revolts in Vietnam. There's actually, funny enough, another set of female revolutionaries earlier on called the Trung Sisters in 39 to 43 AD, who also tried to beat back the Chinese. They were unsuccessful, as Lady Trieu would end up as well. But there's a pretty long history of the Vietnamese having to fight back against the Chinese as well as other foreign entities, period. I have this quote, and this is something she was quoted as saying, and I should say, I'll say a different version of this quote because this quote changes, but I think this is just such a badass quote, which is, she's quoted as saying, essentially her brother asked her, why does she want to fight the Chinese? Why does she want to like revolt against them? Because he's trying to get her to not do it. And she says, I'd like to ride storms, kill orcas on the open sea, drive out the aggressors, reconquer this country, undo the ties of serfdom, and never bend my back to be the concubine of whatever man. Which is a badass thing to say. Again, it's hard to tell if this actually happened. There was a bunch of different versions of this quote. If anyone has actually watched the new Watchmen series on HBO, that actually references that one of the main antagonists in that show is Lady Trieu. She actually is based on this character kind of loosely, or is a reference to this character. They actually use that quote in the show, which I actually didn't know about until I did this research. So that is the kind of again, there's a lot of theatrics kind of surrounding this character. She's cited as being, there's a bunch of different versions of this, but one one finding has her as standing 9 feet tall, having 3-foot long breasts, having a voice that sounds like a temple bell. It's said that she could eat many rice pecks, walk 500 leagues a day, and that her beauty could shake any man's soul. Her long hair reached to her shoulders, and she rode an elephant into battle. Those are the descriptions we have of her. Now, as to the actual person that existed, what probably happened is it seems like there was a female revolutionary who led a group of a couple thousand soldiers that had gotten together from the mountains and tried to lead a rebel group against the Wu Eastern Wu dynasty at this time. They were unsuccessful. They sent the Chinese sent soldiers over and essentially quelled the rebellion. And it said that she was fought them for about 5 to 6 months. As to what actually happened to her, some say she was killed on the battlefield. Some say she sacrificed herself by jumping off a cliff, thereby making herself immortal. Hence where the deity stuff kind of comes from. But I think this is a kind of an interesting example of what we talked about earlier, in that the only reason that we think Lady Triyu is real is because we have findings, or we have writings of her from Vietnamese scholars and from Vietnamese historians at the time. But if we look through the Wu dynasty and any of the Chinese records, we actually don't find any mention of her at all during this time period. Which is really fascinating because China is known for taking meticulous notes on their history. It's one of the Chinese history is like that statement in itself is silly because it spans a huge amount of time and there's so much historical record and information that we can go through that's detailed too. Like we know the amount of soldiers that were sent, the exact generals that were sent at this time. So we do know that a conflict here happened. We knew who was involved on the Chinese side, but it was kind of viewed at that time that the Chinese actually only wrote about their victories, meaning that the only information we actually have about the specific Vietnamese revolution was the writings that the Chinese were able to buy off. I'm using the word Chinese kind to just refer to that dynasty at the time, but China is split into multiple groups at this time. It's just for ease. But they were able to show that, or their record shows that they bought off rebel groups. It shows when they defeated rebel groups, but it actually doesn't tell any of the history of any of those rebel groups. It doesn't tell the history of any of the cities that they engaged in, other than what is told from the Wu side of that, which is a point we've hit on and other times before. But this idea that when we look at history, especially when we look at war history, it's really important that we get as many pieces from as many of the people involved as possible, because this is what happens. If let's say that the Vietnamese were entirely destroyed. Let's say this was a different kind. They weren't trying to take over the area. They were trying to just destroy everything there. If that were the case, this story may very well never exist, because if the only information written is from the Eastern Wu people, there's no historical record that would ever prove that this is a thing.
Well, there's only one historical record.
Yeah, exactly. Assuming that this is destroyed. I mean, we're talking about 200 AD. This is a long time ago. Even for like these records to last this long is impressive. So I think this is I like this story because it's a perfect look at the fact of how history works. That even when we have reliable sources, that still doesn't mean we know everything. We still have to go back and analyze those reliable sources with new information that's received, especially if we can get a diverse view on people that were engaged at that time.
Now, I have a theory about this one.
Yeah.
And I believe this person did exist and that these things took place. And I do believe that this was a very important figure for Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say
Still
that
is
is because the Chinese allowed them to deify this person.
Mhm.
And that's unique in the sense that when you are when you have control over someone else,
Mhm.
you want to control the narrative. Having this person be a deity, a not real person,
Mhm.
just an idea, actually reduces the odds of an actual true rebellion.
Mhm.
You see, because if it's a real person that stood up, see, a real person standing up, you don't want people thinking that real people can stand up.
Mhm.
Now, a deity standing up, well, they're a deity. They're different. They're different than us.
Mhm.
And they have superpowers and all these things that allow them to be able to stand up, but it does control the population in their
Mhm.
beliefs. It seems like it would be the opposite, but it's
Mhm.
actually not true.
Mhm.
People don't want normal people to be able to stand up to them.
Mhm.
A superpower standing up negates all these other people from really gaining the courage to stand up.
Mhm.
So, now that's my opinion. I said that.
It's an interesting theory. Yeah, I think there's
But I've seen that all over the globe where
Yeah.
they've taken people that were real. They don't want the real person's memory to really exist, but they know it does exist. So they deify those people. They raise them to another level.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about this particular woman. It's been done for men.
Mhm.
And different characters. You give them a godly level,
Yeah.
and it takes them. They're not a normal person anymore. They're the anomaly.
Yeah.
You can't do it.
Mhm.
They were different than you. You can't do that. They
Yeah.
were special. The gods gifted them something. The gods granted them a power. The gods gave them something.
Mhm.
And it's a way of manipulating populations to keep them under control. That's my opinion.
Yeah. I mean,
I could be wrong.
Yeah, I'd have to look more into it, but I do think there's plenty of examples of that. Like, Marx is a perfect example, or Lenin, like any of these characters. It actually became more important to look at, the Soviets actually held up these individuals, with more importance than the actual things that they preached and the concepts they believed, because it's a lot easier to manipulate people off of the belief in an individual than it is to have them believe the things that individual believed, because those beliefs are dangerous. Those beliefs are what could actually better, or move that society to do something. But that individual itself, if you make them rally around that person, you can say that you're doing their will, and that's all you need to do. Or that their will was somehow divine or different, and then you're right, you don't have a choice, because why would you rationally decide to engage in something that you believe a folk hero did or a god did? Mm-hmm. It's now out of something you could possibly do. There might be something to that. I think there's probably more research to be done, but I think that's a fair theory.
Yeah. Now I have one more. Whenever you're done,
we have time. Yeah, let's hit it.
Do we?
Yeah.
All right. So I am going to say I saved the best for last, because
I agree.
This one I was absolutely impressed with.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to hit it. Her name was Jean D Claisson, definitely French. 1300 to 1359 is what she lived. She was also known as Jean de Belleville. She had several husbands. But she was also known as the Lioness of Brittany, or the Bloody Lioness. She was a noble woman. She was married the first time at the age of 12, had a child at the age of 14, and then a child at the age of 16. Her first husband was I think 7 years older than her.
Okay.
Passed, She had another husband, so on and so forth. Her third husband is fairly important because she actually loved him. And he was responsible for a castle, a French castle. The British laid siege to it. He was captured. He was ransomed, but the British soldiers asked for a very small ransom, which, based off of his position, was odd. So he and his name is Oliver. And essentially what happened was he got released, went home to his family, was invited to a tournament. And so he shows up to the tournament and gets arrested. They have a trial with him and like 40 other people, a generic trial, and they kill all of them. They find them all to be traitors. Not only did they kill him, but they beheaded him. They put his body on a pike and put it up on a gate. They put his body in a gibbet, which is a metal cage that you hang on the side of a wall.
Yeah, I feel like we've seen those in like movies and stuff. The like the metal cage that the people get stuck in.
Yeah, and so she was very upset about this. And she brought the children. Right, she brought all the children. She had more than 2 at this point. She brought all the children out, and she brought them to the body and said, here's your father, and we are going to exact our revenge. So what she does is she goes back home. She sells off their entire estate. I'm going to look at my notes here so I get the names right. So she, now Charles de Blois was the individual that ransomed her husband, and he's the one who talked to the French king about the suspect
treason
payment.
Yeah.
So she had a grudge against him specifically. So what she did, there's 2 stories here. So one story is that she raised an army, laid siege to one of the castles that supported Charles de Blois, and then destroyed the castle. Left. Anyways, the second one is that she actually showed up to the castle. They let her in because of her position and stature, along with her escort, her armed guards. At which point she stayed there for a short period of time and then attacked everybody in the castle, opened the castle for the rest of her army to invade. Now, one of the things that is unique about this individual is that she had a thing that she had a task that she told people. She's like, don't kill everyone. Leave 1 or 2 survivors. And then she would literally have them brought to her. And then she would tell them, now run away and tell them that Jean de Claisson is coming. And so she attacked several castles that were supportive of Charles de Blois. Okay. With her own private army. Okay. Then she decided that wasn't sustainable. So she took what she had left. She bought 3 ships, had them blacked out. So all the wood was black. She had the sails dyed crimson red. All right. And she, it was called the Black Fleet. She became a pirate, specifically hunting down French royal or French noble ships. So she goes into the the contested British French waters.
Yeah.
Okay. And repeatedly attacks French ships. Now, one of the things, once again, she would like to leave survivors. All right. So she mainly spent her time in the English Channel specifically. So she wasn't like a pirate, like going to the Caribbean and any of those things. She kept to the English Channel, specifically targeting those French ships. And her flagship was actually named My Revenge. That was the name of her flagship, My Revenge.
Appropriate.
Now, what's funny is I tried to look up how many ships she attacked.
Yeah.
I found nothing. The only word that was continually brought up was countless. How many ships do you have to sink
for it to be countless?
For them? And keep in mind that this is an ancient history.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is like
we had writing
14th century, right?
Like 1300 to 1359 was when she was alive. So, literally, it was so embarrassing that they literally wouldn't put a number on it. Okay. Now, in a fairly short period of time, she was wreaking havoc on these French ships, and King Henry, I believe the third, is very upset. So he sends his best mariners after this lady. And a storm hits and causes a bunch of chaos, and she has to flee. Now, she's a woman on a ship. She has, at that time, at least she had 3 ships. She had her children on the ship with her. She rowed in a rowboat, okay, to Britain. It was a 5-day row. She lost one of her older sons to the elements on that journey. When she landed, they were ecstatic to meet this lady, the British government.
Yeah.
And the British king, I think it's Edward, invited her out, refitted her, sponsored her, and said, please go out, do your thing.
Yeah.
So she was welcomed, and then quite literally went out and just wreaked havoc on the French. The French never defeated her. She was never defeated. Not true. I mean, she was never killed, never captured.
Yeah.
Okay. She did this for 13 years. She didn't start pirating until she was in her 40s. So she did this for like 13 years, wreaked tons of havoc on the French. And then one day she said, I believe that I've had my retribution. She walked away from it, went back to Brittany, and married another individual. So I want to read some of the main description for the survivors, because she did leave survivors.
Yeah.
Which is unique and a little bit ballsy. It's like, go back, tell your French king.
Yeah.
Who sent you? So let me see here. So according to legend, the few survivors of these massacres always told the same story. Jean's pirates would board the victims' ships and slaughter nearly everyone aboard. Then, as a final flourish, D Claisson would personally behead any nobles with her wicked axe, a fitting revenge for her husband's grim demise. All right. We hear about pirates all the time. All right. This lady she was something else.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. She started with her own money, raised her own army,
Yeah.
attacked French castles, then buys 3 ships, attacks French ships. She's so successful at it that when she finally kind of gets her butt whipped, and the storm may have had something to do with it,
Yeah.
may not have, has this 5-day harrowing journey where she loses one of her children and is invited and is literally, invited in by the British and says, "Hey, we want to work with you."
Yeah.
Now, while she was plundering these French ships and doing all these things, she was also running supplies to support the British in the 100-Year War.
Mm-hmm.
What's really there's a couple of different roles in warfare.
Yeah.
And I want to kind of show how these ladies meet some of those bills.
Mm-hmm.
So one is what I like to call just the warrior, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these are just the people that they actually just go out and do the fighting.
Yeah.
Okay. Another role is the person that supports the warfare.
Yeah.
So these people raise the horses or the money.
Mm-hmm.
They facilitate warfare in some way. They facilitate the warfare. And then you have what I like to call the symbol. Okay, so those are, for example, Joan of Arc.
Yeah.
So Joan of Arc is a symbol. She wore armor, had a sword, but Joan of Arc never actually killed anyone.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I know, she never killed anyone. She was the symbol. She planned a lot of the battles.
Mm-hmm.
She maneuvered people on the battlefield, but she never actually engaged in the battle itself. So the last lady that I talked about, she was the symbol. One, she physically actually supported the war by providing all these different things.
Yeah.
And then in some aspects, she was even engaging in the warfare itself.
Yeah.
I don't want to mess her name up. Ludmila.
Yeah.
Okay. Started out as just a warrior. But she was so good at it that the government said, "Hey, we need you to fill another role." And then she literally became a symbol to them.
Yeah.
Because they did have movies and with audio, right, at that time, World War II. So she did become a symbol. But the big thing was she was trying to support the war effort in a supply and in getting other people to come in.
Yeah.
Loon, while she really wasn't a symbol, okay, she was a warrior, and she did bring a lot of supplies.
Yeah.
To a lot of wealth to support battle operations. None are more or less important.
Yeah.
And a lot of people would just take and think, well, the symbol really isn't that important, but they don't understand warfare then.
Yeah.
A symbol is very important, especially for your ancient forces. You had to have something to draw in the funds and the resources. There had to be some slight, something.
Yeah.
And you could, and a lot of times it was made up. All right. But it's not unheard of for you to get people to the party with a symbol. And then once they're there, they're there. They don't have a choice. They have to fight.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's important to recognize that there's not just one role that these ladies are playing. These ladies are playing the roles that are played out and they're important. Those roles are very important.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it goes back to kind of what we said at the beginning, and that like we're talking about the warriors here because it's what we're talking about in the sport and things like that. But the women who worked in doing computing in World War II are just as important to that war and that conflict as the soldier is, as the person at home building machines for the war effort, as the mothers that are taking care of you still have to have a parent there, to take care of the
exactly
children. These roles are still
I'd
important.
like to say there are a lot of women in the military globally. And they are fantastic, amazing warriors, and that is absolutely true. And for a lot of them, they have a husband that does that role of taking care of the family when they are gone.
A role I would like to say, by the way, is not the same in all society. There are societies where the men actually are expected to stay home. Like historically, you can look them up. There has been societies where the men stay at home and take care of the children, and the women actually go out and do work.
Yes,
so
exactly.
That's a societal thing as well.
But because we are talking about badass women, I will say that in my experience in the military, some of the most badass women weren't even the fellow soldiers that were with me. It was literally all of the spouses and mothers that were left behind to take care of everything when we were gone.
Yeah.
So all of those roles that individual would normally have before they deploy, before they leave, changing the oil, mowing the lawn, and fixing, different things, that all disappears. They have to figure out a way to take care of those things. They also still have to do their roles.
Yeah.
That they normally have when you're present. And their true value, a lot of people probably won't recognize this, but I do, is that when you are gone, when there's problems at home, there's problems abroad.
Yeah.
When home is taken care of and the family is taken care of and things are going good, the soldier can concentrate on soldiering in that country. When there's problems at home, they get distracted, they make mistakes, they get hurt, other soldiers end up getting hurt. And so I would say that they have my profound respect as being badasses, because they are having to shoulder that burden, that load, in the void of that other person not being there.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about women now, but I think any man or woman, anyone that has to take on that role that's a lot to do. It is profound.
Yeah, but we were just talking about women.
Yeah,
today,
so I agree.
I didn't want to.
I get you. I just wanted to make sure we're clear. But no, I would agree. Well, I think I guess any other thoughts before we close out?
No, I think that we have to start viewing people for what their accomplishments are.
Yeah.
Outside of the other stuff, we can recognize a person that does something amazing, and just say, "Hey," and they happen to be a woman. Being a woman isn't necessarily the critical thing, but it also shouldn't be the thing that prevents us from talking about them.
Yeah, I agree.
Their accomplishments are just as heroic. They're just as amazing, sometimes even more amazing, to be quite honest. You just have to be able to find them, unfortunately. And it's hard to get information. It's really hard to get information because it gets hidden. People are embarrassed. When they get their butt kicked by a woman, they're embarrassed. They write as little as possible.
Yeah.
And they water it down and they try to make it like a fairy tale. that
Yeah.
is less believable, I guess.
If especially like if you have, I mean, we're talking about points where like this is far before, like women's rights as a concept in the modern world existed. Like we're still dealing with slavery. We're still dealing with like heavy classism, heavy sexism, all these things. So it's not even just the prejudice. There's a literal incentive for a group of people to maintain power. And it is not beneficial to have women believe that they can gain power. If they don't have any power at this point and you have the power that they would have, it is beneficial to you to keep these things out of history. It is beneficial for you to not engage. It's a global problem. Yeah.
And you're 100% correct. And all that, I hope that people will hear this and at least go, let's see what else is out there.
Yeah.
Because I found a bunch of badass women.
Mm-hmm.
I found a ton of them.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of the information was difficult, but I did find a lot of them. And I just picked, the ones that kind of, jumped out at me.
Yeah.
So I would say, hey, go out and look for yourself and see what you can find. And you'd be amazed at how impressed you'll be by what you find.
I agree. Yeah, I would agree. Well, with that, I think we're good to call it. I should say real quick, anyone that's still listening, we're gonna do a quick little bonus thing at the end, which I think is super cool. After this is done, so make sure to tune in for that. But if you are listening to this after the fact, we really do appreciate you listening to the end. Please do follow us on whatever podcast service you're currently listening on. If you have any questions for us, or if we mess anything up and you have any corrections you'd like us to make, you can always email us at thewarchat@gmail.com, or you can go to our Twitter, the War Chat, or Facebook, the War Chat. You can message us there. Always happy to get your suggestions for future episodes. Always happy to get your comments, concerns, things like that. We also post the live video version of this on YouTube. So you can actually go check out the War Room on YouTube. You can watch this after the fact there. If you do want to catch this live, if you do want to see the bonus section that we're going to do afterwards, I don't know if it's the thing we're going to do from now on, but if you do want to catch us live, participate in chat, anything like that, you can actually go to twitch.tv/ the War Room Podcast, I believe. Let me double check that's right. I think that's right. Just sent it, but I just want to make sure. That's the one I don't have on this list for some reason. Yeah, twitch.tv/ War Room Podcast. You can catch us there live. If you give us a follow, you can actually, just War Room Podcast, if you give us a follow there, you'll actually get a notification the next time we go live. We usually go live on Sundays, around the same time period, so like 5:30 Central Daylight Time. Catch us live there. Always happy to have people come in, and we do really appreciate you listening. Any closing thoughts before we call it?
Yeah, stay safe, wear your masks, take care of yourselves, and take care of your families.
Please do. Again, thank you so much for listening, and make sure to catch us on the next one.